Can the entrepreneurial process be systematized? We believe so, via the application of our Austrian fundamentals-based process to specific cases. Today, we analyze an instructive example case.
This is the Economics for Business podcast. We're here to help all businesses become champions for customers and value, improving lives with preferred and innovative products and services. We offer you the knowledge and tools to make your entrepreneurial journey a successful one. Now, here's your host, Hunter Hastings.
Hi, Hunter Hastings here. Business is not complicated. It's complex. More accurately, it's a complex system. Complex systems are hard to predict and hard to guide because of the many ways in which many components can interact with each other and result in unpredicted outcomes like emergence and spontaneous order. In dealing with complexity in the real world, in business, the place to start is with fundamentals. If you can get your business fundamentals right, you can operate a cogent approach that will be sustainable, whatever the complexity of your business context. One of the first fundamentals is process. If you're able to develop a process and sub-processes that everyone in your firm can follow, you have a guide to actions and decision-making in every situation. At Economics for Business, we've developed a process called Entrepreneurial GPS. The GPS references to the concept that if you know where you are and you have a target destination, you can work out the best route to get there. Listen today to an entrepreneur who did just that and who has mapped her journey for us to the Economics for Business GPS. The process begins at imagination, an entrepreneurial super tool for creating the future. It proceeds through design, which is a formalization of imagination, and then to assembly, which is the combination of assets and resources sufficient to bring an idea to the readiness for the market. The next stage is marketing, presentation to the customer for their consideration. Then the customer experience phase, in which the customer tries and evaluates the entrepreneurial product or service and renders a verdict on its value. Given a positive verdict, your business enters a multifaceted management and growth phase, where a different set of tools, perhaps even a different business model, is required to advance. And then it's even part of the process, a completion of sorts, to give up ownership by merging into a larger entity, selling a majority stake, or even the whole business, or turning it over to your partners or the next generation. This process is not linear. It can be quite recursive. You might initiate the process for multiple ventures at multiple times, new projects, new brands, innovations, a mid-stage correction, an efficiency drive, or a growth drive. In all cases, the process and its associated knowledge and tools and connections to people can guide the way through complexity systematically rather than randomly. Our guest today is Jacqui Boland. She is the founder of, and until its recent acquisition, the CEO of Red Tricycle, a digital lifestyle brand for moms and families that in 10 fast growth years became established as a profitable leader in the competitive space of mom-oriented content. Let's find out about the knowledge space from which she launched her venture and her advance through the Entrepreneurial GPS process. Jacqui, welcome to the Economics for Business podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
What's exciting for us, we have a theme here that we call the Entrepreneurial Journey, Jacqui, that creating new economic value, which is what we're all about, takes time. It takes many twists and turns along the way. You've got to accumulate knowledge as you go and respond to the signals of the marketplace. It's not always planning and strategy, we think. It's adaptiveness and responsiveness and flexibility and a little bit of mindset, determination to succeed. So we're looking to learn from you. You're at a stage where you can assess your own journey, which has been hugely successful. And we want to hear your story. And we like to start at the beginning. So tell us a little bit of your origin story, Jacqui. What were you doing before you started Red Tricycle, which is the company we're going to talk about?
Um, I'll go back a little bit. I'll go back to the very beginning. And I like
Mhm.
to say I come from a family of hustlers, and not in a
Mhm.
derogatory way, but a family like my parents are both from New York City. My mom grew up in Hell's Kitchen, my father in Harlem. And they escaped New York City in the 1970s, which it was, pretty bad place to live at the time, and moved to the suburbs. And they kind of did whatever they needed to do to be able to afford that lifestyle. My dad was a landscaper. My mom had a real estate license, and she had an antique store. And my father, they bought a duplex, and my father bought an arcade, a pinball arcade, and so they sold things at the flea market. I mean, they always had something going on, and it was a family affair. And so my sister, my brother, and I were always part of that. So on the weekends, I might find myself sort of at the flea market, selling plants or whatever it was that they happened to get their hands on. And so I guess I never thought about what they did as entrepreneurship, but I guess it was.
Mhm.
And so personally, I decided as when I got old enough that I wanted to pursue a different path. That lifestyle was very chaotic to me. And I just wanted to go to college. Neither of my parents had graduated from college, and get a corporate job with benefits like a 401k and health insurance. I just wanted a very normal life like my friends' parents had. And so I studied public relations. I moved to San Francisco. I worked in PR for a couple years, and I moved over to um, publishing, media publishing, and worked for some big companies: Meredith, Reed Elsevier, Miller Publishing. Had a great corporate experience, and then I worked for some smaller companies like San Francisco Magazine and Yoga Journal. And then one of my former bosses started her own magazine. It was a new yoga company called Breathe. Yoga magazine, and so an easy transition for me to experience startup life with somebody I knew and a framework that I understood, which was magazines.
Mhm.
Um, and so, once I sort of got a taste of um, working for a startup, I don't think there was any going back for me to corporate life.
Yeah, irreversible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were magazines digital back then, or are you talking published paper?
Yeah, no, we are talking old school.
Okay.
And so, print magazines where, you were talking about circulation, right? Meredith had Better Homes and Gardens and all those magazines, even San Francisco Magazine. Um, so yes, so the magazine background, and I think one of the reasons when I started Red Tricycle was because, media overall was at a crossroads where, magazines had existed and had been huge moneymakers for bigger media companies, but digital media was evolving and it wasn't quite as profitable yet. And so the intersection of how media companies could be profitable online was just super interesting to me. And it was one of my inspirations for starting a business is, when you do work for a corporation, um, one of the benefits is that, it teaches you how a business operates. And so you see
Mhm.
both the good and the bad. And, working for a media company, for a magazine, I could see sort of the layers of bureaucracy and just inefficiency. And I could imagine a way to do it better, leaner, less costly. And so that was the business inspiration for me.
Well, you used a magic word there, Jackie, which is imagine. And
Yes.
in our entrepreneurial journey, we have imagination as the first step, which is we conceive as before formal design, before formal assembly of the business. There's something in your head that you imagine could be a business. So, can you recall that stage, what were you imagining? What did you think you would do? What do you think would happen in your imagination?
Yeah. So I think I just shared a little bit about sort of the business model,
Yeah.
but from a consumer perspective, I was at a crossroads in my life in that I was newly pregnant and had just landed in a brand new city. We had just moved to Seattle, which I grew up in New York. I lived in California. Never in my wildest dreams thought I would live in Seattle, and suddenly here I am. And my husband is working ridiculous hours at Microsoft, so I'm pretty much on my own, and I am trying to see this new city through the lens of new parenthood, and thinking, we didn't have many friends with kids, and so I was finding myself googling things like, can kids eat sushi? Can you bring kids to bars? Right? Can kids go to rock concerts? And so lots of things like that. And so I had this idea of what I wanted as a consumer, but not exactly how to execute it. Was it sort of a printed guidebook? I guess it could have been a magazine, but it felt like, digital was certainly the path forward, for newer parents. And so yeah, and so my inspiration was trying to figure out something to make a guidebook for being a new parent, and not just being a new parent, but being a fun new parent, like having
Mhm.
some semblance of my former life as a parent.
They say every entry into a search bar is a cry for help. So it's, it's like you, it's like you fit that. So,
Yes.
um, part of imagination is imagining your customer or your consumer. You've hinted at that a little bit, but did you imagine there were mothers out there with the same need, or did you formally explore it? Did you have an intuition? What were you thinking about your customer?
Yeah, I would say Red Tricycle was primarily driven by intuition. I was fortunate in that the business that I built, a media company, digital media company, was very cost efficient. I didn't have to design a physical product, build a supply chain, et cetera. So I could create content, send it out to 40 moms, and see how they responded.
Mhm.
And so I was able to get feedback quickly. And the things that about moms, and this was sort of an instinct, but I think it's proven true. And, 10, 12 years later, I still stand by it, is that moms are huge researchers and consumers of content, especially new moms. Like
Mhm.
if your kid isn't sleeping through the night, you're not just going to buy one book about sleep training. You're going to buy every book on the shelf.
Mhm. Yeah.
And 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 so with Red Tricycle, even if there was similar content, whether in a print format or, digitally on a website or a blog or a newsletter, it was highly likely that moms would still read Red Tricycle, because that's just how moms are. And not to say dads aren't either, but moms, tend to be like 85% the seekers of information, and they'll sort of forward the information to their partners.
A quick note: did you know that we provide supplemental materials for each podcast? Listening to and understanding the key takeaways from our expert guests helps you think better about building a more beautiful business. Taking direct action and implementing these strategies is when the real work begins. Take a concrete, immediate step to implementing a better business model today by downloading the show notes and business tool we've created for this episode. Visit Mises.org/E4Bpod. That's MISES.org/E, the number 4, the letter B, POD, and click on today's episode. Now, back to our interview.
So that's as you say, clever intuition that was proven by the market. So let's let's transition into what we call design, which is kind of the more formal part of putting your business model together before you actually get to market. So we think of spreadsheets, or we think of starting a rendition of your website, or there are tools out there like the business model canvas.
Yep.
How did you go through the design phase? How did you manage that?
So when I started Red Tricycle, I wasn't sure if I was building a big business. I certainly didn't think at the time I was going to be the CEO of a venture-backed company. So I borrowed a lot from the magazine world and adapted it for a digital environment. And so, using a media kit from a magazine and adapting it for my purposes. I had worked with a woman, Deanna Brown, on a previous startup, and she was the interim CEO of Daily Candy, which was a brand and business and a business model that I admired. And so, the first few years of Red Tricycle were fairly intuitive. I knew how to create content, whether I did it myself or I hired writers, and I knew how to sell. And so the design process itself um, was was fairly intuitive, relying on a existing model in magazines, adapting it, hiring some graphic designers. It wasn't until I started thinking about scaling the business and started talking to investors that I put in a more formal process into place.
But we could say in design that you found a model that you could follow, perhaps not closely or formally, like Daily Candy, right? That was one design.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Correct.
But it just kind of happened. The design just kind of happened. It sounds like,
Yeah.
based on your expertise.
Yeah, exactly. And there was certainly like limitations, if you're using an email service provider like Constant Contact, then your design is limited to, the templates they had available.
Mhm.
Everything was sort of shoestring budgeted. So that, those also influenced our design.
Yeah. So that brings us to what we think of as the next step in the journey, which is intermingled with all the others. But at the beginning, we call it assembly. So you've got to find those resources. You've got to find the writers. You've got to find the constant contact software. You've got to find other vendors. You've got to design a marketing plan and execute it. And eventually, in your case, you went to venture capital as well. So how did you think about assembly? We call it resource assembly, but do you think like that, or how does assembly happen when you're getting started?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, with our business specifically, because we launched in Seattle, and then we moved to San Francisco, and then we moved to LA and Portland, across the country. And so in each of those markets, we had to assemble the right teams of editors and salespeople in those markets and do outreach to businesses, et cetera. And so um, one thing, when I started talking initially, I was just raising angel investment and hadn't considered venture capital. And so some of the groups like 500 Startups and Launch had really robust uh, communications with other entrepreneurs, and so that was really helpful in just thinking about different ESPs or software, et cetera. You had a lot of people who had either started businesses that had been successful or failed. Either way, they learned a ton and were willing to share it. And so tapping into those networks, and I think AngelList is a great network as well. And there's tons of conferences you can attend. And so there's so much already out there, whether it is recommended software vendors and or some business models that you can modify for your own purposes. So that was super helpful. And then, specifically to Red Tricycle, we relied heavily on the mom to mom word of mouth.
Hmm.
And we, launched in markets, when we started in Seattle, then moved to San Francisco. Well, there's a ton of families that move either from Seattle to San Francisco or San Francisco to Seattle, right? Because of the tech startup, et cetera, job opportunities. And so, we relied on those people to reach out to their friends. We relied on the Red Tricycle customer list if we needed to hire a writer or an editor or a marketing person. Even, 10 years later, it's still for us the best source of hiring talent. And so that was sort of our rollout strategy, was just going into sort of warm markets where we knew another mom from another city would recommend us to their mom friend in LA or San Diego.
So you go to market approach, which is kind of the next step. Did you formalize that? There's some word of mouth, there's some email marketing, there's some other components. Did you have a formal market entry, go to market kind of structure? Or again, is it more instinctive?
Yeah, no, we certainly did, especially once we took on some venture capital,
Hmm.
because and so we focused on a couple metrics really, and ramping those up pretty quickly for us. Our three KPIs were traffic, subscribers, and revenue, and so we knew from whatever previous markets we had sort of the top performing content, the top things that moms were interested in. And so we would create content. We would seed a market with, say, 20 or 30 stories that drove good SEO traffic that would drive the traffic for us. And then our job was to convert that traffic to subscribers to the newsletter. There was no cost to subscribe. It was free, but it still implied an intent and a relationship with the customer, that they believed in us enough to subscribe to our newsletter. And then the third part was, we built a list in each market of paying subscribers, and then we could rely on, hey, these kids museums in Seattle love Red Tricycle, and then leverage that to get the children's museums in Atlanta to also advertise with us. And so, and that fulfilled our third KPI, which was driving revenue.
Hmm. So the revenue is primarily advertiser revenue.
Correct.
Yeah. So another piece that we talk about is brand. Jacqui, not thinking so much about the name Red Tricycle, although it'd be interesting to find out where that came from. But the brand that you talk about on your site, a lifestyle brand that fuels the parenting universe with daily inspiration for family fun, which I understand is just a formal set of words to express your empathy with moms. But tell us how you were thinking about brand and building a brand.
Yeah. So um, there was you know, even though mom consumed tons of media, they consumed different media for different things. And, Baby Center was, the sort of gold star for medical advice about baby's development and child development. And we didn't think we could do a better job than they could. Um, and then there was, other media outlets dedicated to sort of mom herself, and then there was outlets dedicated to um, children as well, right? Whether it's Sesame Street or PBS. And so our whole focus was, how do we inspire people to spend time as a family? How do we, and we optimistically thought, well, we can use media for good. You can consume content on Red Tricycle and then go offline and do something with your family. And so our KPI was never about spending, 10, 12, 15 page views, spending a half hour on Red Tricycle. It was really like quick, get an idea or an inspiration to spend time with your kids. and then go offline and do it, and then come back 2 days later and do it over and over again. So
Mhm.
our model was a little bit different, that in that we weren't looking for the infinite scroll. We were really like, find an idea, find it quickly, get off and do something. Um, and so this was focusing on sort of the lighter side of parenting and having fun with your kids. Um, it felt good to us. It felt we could steer away from the mommy wars about bottle feeding versus breastfeeding. Yeah, we didn't have to wade into politics, and we could stay sort of in the middle lane and offer something for all parents.
And another term we use is customer experience. That's a pretty widespread term these days, obviously. But were you able to follow your customers? Did they actually find those pieces of inspiration and go back or go out and do it with their family? Did they come back and tell you? What was the customer experience as you were able to monitor it?
Yeah, and this was where social media did come into play. And so, people would send us emails, and this it's all anecdotal. I don't have any hard data out of what
Mhm.
percentage of people. But the fact that somebody would take a picture of themselves at the zoo and hashtag, I think it was like best weekend ever or whatever the hashtag that we had was, and you could see specifically that they were, doing the things that we recommended. Not just everyday moms, which is super important, but even celebrity moms. I think Randy Zuckerberg, Pink, Ivanka Trump.
Mhm.
When her kids were little, used Red Tricycle and either tweeted about it or shared it on Instagram that they found this great idea for a campsite or a restaurant. So that was our data point that we were doing a good job.
That's great, actually. We prefer that a lot over statistics and percentages and so on like that. That kind of subjective value data, subjective anecdotal data is exactly what you're looking for. I think it says the customer is bonded with you in some emotional way. So that's great.
Yeah.
Um, did you think about competition at all? You've mentioned Baby Center and Sesame Street and things like that, but were there competitive brands that you had to navigate around, or was that not an issue for you?
I mean, I think competition is what keeps every entrepreneur up at night. And so it wasn't necessarily other media companies. It wasn't the Merediths or even, startup people who were doing something similar to us. But I think it was the new business models, first about, a year or so after raising venture capital, suddenly it was like Groupon and Living Social. And I think there was one dedicated to moms also. And they really like upended the advertiser business model that we had, and it was just a huge distraction that ultimately proved to be unsustainable. But um, and then after that, of course, it was Facebook and then Instagram, and so it is easy distracted to get distracted by the new thing, the new buzzy
Mhm.
thing that everybody's spawning over, whether it is, the media itself or VCs, or everybody's all in on, marketplace model or whatever the new thing is, social media.
Right.
So it's hard not to get distracted by that. And so we always said, okay, our goal is to inspire families to spend time together. And it doesn't always have to be in the same format. If we need to evolve where or how we tell that story, that's okay. I think the challenge is, you try to be everywhere, right? And you try to do some email and some website and some social media, and whether okay, it's Facebook this week, then it's Instagram, then it's TikTok. I mean, it's really hard to your brand gets diluted across multiple platforms.
Yeah, we, as economists, we think about that as allocation of resources, and that's a real challenge, right?
Yes,
You don't want to get too
absolutely.
dispersed. So is your advice to stay focused, stay in your lane, don't worry about competition? What's your advice for entrepreneurs going through that kind of minefield?
I think, I think I wish we had stayed focused. We did ultimately dial back and said, okay, we can't be on every platform. What are the platforms that make sense to us, where our users are? And so we didn't do TikTok, we didn't do Snapchat, particularly because, like, Pinterest is where moms are looking for ideas and inspiration. So that makes sense to us, right? That makes sense for our brand. Um, and so maybe somebody else is winning in the parenting space on, Facebook or TikTok. That's fine, but it doesn't align with our mission.
Good. So it's the activity of your customers that's the way you keep focused. You see what's meaningful to them and stay where they are.
Yes, exactly. Or, when um this sort of the mindset of when they're using those is, we think of the Red Tricycle users as having an active mindset. Facebook, you're kind of leaning back, maybe a glass of wine and scrolling infinitely. Whereas when you're reading Red Tricycle, you're kind of leaning forward. You're thinking, you're planning the weekend, you're going to find something, you're going to forward it to either your husband or your mom's group. And so we think, okay, where else are those people have a similar mindset, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, so that's why, like, Pinterest was a fit for us.
Yeah, that's a great insight. Actually, how do you define that mindset? Again, is it intuition because you're a mom as well, or is the research that gets you that, or it's just instinct? How do you get a feel for the mindset?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it is instinct. Not just me personally, but when you have a team of parents, and and they're also consuming lots of media because we're keeping up with the competition, so we're all sort of sharing that. And then I guess it is supported by consumer research. We ask them what else they read and why they read it, and again, moms and dads read lots of content for lots of different reasons. But specifically, they read Red Tricycle to plan an activity.
Yeah, we're big believers in that intuition part, Jacqui, that there's some kind of a connection that the entrepreneur or the business owner has with the customers. And you can rationalize that and you can talk about research, but there's something going on there. There's some connection, some empathy, some mutual effort to send signals and respond to signals that works. You can't explain it in a spreadsheet, but it happens. It sounds like you had that.
Yes, yes, we did.
Good, good.
Yeah, and then so we sort of, that was our hypothesis, and then we sort of defined it more clearly by, like, making sure all of our content was written in an active voice, and making sure all of our, like, visual elements were, contain, like, families playing together and doing stuff together. And so, hopefully, subliminally, we were setting the tone for this is who we are.
Yes, that's very thoughtful and detailed in the execution of your strategy there.
Yeah.
So we have another pin in our journey map. We call it management and growth, which is you got your business up and running. You're doing all the things you've described, but you're finding your business growing, or you got to keep it growing, and in your case, you're adding markets, but you're hiring people. You're maybe moving to bigger offices. You're maybe adding bigger advertisers. I noticed you had brands like Pampers and Nike on your site. You got to deal with cash flow and all of those things. Tell us about growth management. How you thought about that in the years where that was
Yeah,
prominent.
yeah, it's a huge pain point. It's probably the biggest challenge on the entrepreneurial journey is hiring too soon, too late, managing your cash flow. So for us, we started with local advertising, because if you have 10,000 moms in Seattle, that is interesting for a toy store in Seattle or a summer camp in Seattle, but it's not interested to the Pampers, right? Or the Amazon. But
Mhm.
suddenly, if you have 10,000 moms in 20 cities across the US, it gets more interesting for the national brands. And so, so our goal really was to roll out these local markets and build a strong foundation of local ad dollars until we could have enough um, scale to interest national advertisers. And so, w- it was painful for sure, because we didn't scale national advertisers as quickly as we had hoped. So we had suddenly hundreds and hundreds of small businesses, um, which it's kind of a different business model. It's the Yelp model, right, where they have a
Mhm.
in-house sales team and it's sort of dialing for dollars. And so you want to, those are small businesses and we want to support them, and they're the foundation of Red Tricycle. And so we want to be able to support them, but we have to, as a business, land some bigger clients
Yeah.
in order to scale our business. And so, yes, transitioning to national national clients and local content has been, like a 5-year process. Do I wish we had done it sooner? Probably. Um, uh, and the other thing is hiring salespeople is very expensive too. And, sometimes it'll take a year of somebody on salary um, before they can close a big national
Right.
deal. There's a lot of foundational work that needs to be done. So, yeah, it's a delicate process of scaling the business. And so, we put a plan in place, and then we adjusted and
Yeah.
adjusted, and adjusted.
Right. So is that how it feels? A continuous adjustment, continuous balancing, rebalancing, and so on. How does that feel?
Yes, always, all the time.
Mhm.
Because, like a fully staffed company will have, a sales team across the US in every market. But if you can't afford that, you have to stretch and think, okay, well, can this person sell local and national? Could this person cover Chicago and LA? And so, and then once you start to get a little bit bigger, you're like, okay, now we can hire an LA person. What happens to that Chicago rep? It's a constant adjustment. Yeah, it's a constant adjustment.
Did you get to be good at the hiring process, Jacqui? That's one that a lot of entrepreneurs raise as terribly challenging, especially in the case that you're citing, where you're trying to hire a different kind of person for a different kind of function and it's different experience and so on. Is that ever
I think I
something you
finally
master?
did. Yeah, I think I finally did in like the last year or two. Um, and I think we got better about screening candidates, um, being super candid about who we are and what we did and what the experience was like at Red Tricycle. Especially, you want to recruit people who work for big media companies, but if they're used to having huge expense accounts and an assistant, then they're probably not going to be
Mhm.
a good cultural fit for your startup where they're doing everything themselves. And so, yes, we got much better about screening, and I think including more people on my team in the interview process and letting them ask questions both ways, both of the candidates and letting the candidates ask them questions. Um, yeah, I would say probably like the last 2 years, this is sort of a 10-year long process, but the last probably had the most like solid, everybody knows their job, loves what they're doing, gets along team. So that was a win.
Yeah, good. Congratulations.
Yeah.
It- so, does growth feel jerky, or does it feel continuous, or does it feel out of reach, but suddenly it happens. How does growth feel when you're in this stage?
It is never ending, right? You're always looking for the next milestone. And so, you have about a minute where you hit a goal or a milestone, and then, run into the next quarter and you have another goal that's even higher.
Mhm.
So um, it's a constant, it's a constant stress. I would say on the growth side for like the business, as far as like traffic and stuff, there's more of a infrastructure in place. It's like, if we do X, Y, and Z, we can grow SEO traffic by X%. If we implement these procedures, we can grow our subscribers. And so that is um, a little bit more controllable. But the sales part is, you have a big 7-figure account and it's 30% of your annual revenue, right? And suddenly you're spending a lot of time managing that account, but you have to grow other business. And advertisers, they're not they're not going to stay with you necessarily for 10 years, right? They
Mhm.
do chase bright, shiny new things, whether it's a new platform or, the buzzy new media brand. And so you're always chasing new business. You'll have maybe 50% renewals, but then you have to get 50% new business, and your growth goal increases every year. So yeah, it's a lot of work.
Jeff Bezos at Amazon talks about a flywheel. That some businesses can become a flywheel, which you described there. You put more input in, like advertising spending, and the flywheel turns, and you get more business out the other end. But it sounds like you've got a mix of that and some other parts that aren't flywheel. They're stair steps, and as you say, advertisers come in and out. So it sounds like maybe there's a mixture of both of those aspects.
Yeah, correct. That's correct. And then, you have things like a pandemic thrown in, and who the
Mhm.
heck knows, right?
Yeah.
Like, for us, we always said for years and years and years, we're like, national advertisers come and go, local is always there. The summer camp is always going to spend money with us. It may only be $1,000, but we have 1,000 summer camps, and they all spend $1,000. But suddenly, what if there's no summer camp?
Mhm.
What if the store closes? What if nobody can hire a nanny because of the pandemic? Suddenly, okay, now that changes both local and national. So yeah,
Yeah.
but
How did you adjust for that?
um, you found people who were innovating, and lots of online retailers. Everybody was home doing more shopping, right? So you shift gears to you know work with the Amazons and the Targets, and other, people were launching online entertainment, all of the streaming services. So, I mean, that's where you have to really be able to pivot and shift gears to be able to continue to grow.
Yeah. Well, the last pin in our little journey map, Jacqui, we call it disposition. Silicon Valley would call it exit, but we're trying to also encompass the law partner that sells his business to his partners, or the family owner that leaves it to the kids. But so disposition is our term, but exit's another one. And I don't know how much you can tell us about it, but you recently found an acquisition partner, and tell us what you can about that. Firstly, were you looking, or did it come and find you, and what was that process like?
Yeah, I had decided a couple years earlier, once you raise venture capital, the trajectory is to continue to raise and continue to grow.
Mhm.
And I had decided, just really looking at the media landscape, that the exit potential for raising more money wasn't necessarily proportional. And so I had decided that probably the best path forward was not to raise additional venture capital, get the company to profitability, and look for either a strategic partner or acquisition partner. And so we had about 2 years of good, solid revenue growth and profitability. And um, the, my venture capital partners had suggested hiring a banker, but I think everyone I've ever talked to is like, it's like dating, right? You the minute you put your for sale sign out there, nobody wants you. And so I was really hesitating to do that, but I was being pretty candid with everybody I had conversations with. And I wasn't just talking to media companies. I mean, you would think, okay, a media company is a natural acquisition, but most media companies are looking to diversify from an advertising revenue model. So they're looking to do acquisitions in e-commerce or streaming or something different. And so I really had to think out of the box about pretty much anybody could be a strategic partner. And what was the value that we had? One, we had an audience of moms, and as you know, moms are primary consumers for and purchasers of everything from consumer electronics to automotive to healthcare. So there's a lot of opportunity, and so I had to look for somebody who was really interested in a asset that could be a marketing engine for them. And so the conversation with Tiny Beans, I had known the founder of Tiny Beans for 2 years, and so we sort of just talked on and off. And so, the conversation checked a lot of boxes. When we looked at Tiny Beans, the publicly traded company on the Australian Stock Exchange, which was appealing for us because they had access to capital, where they were very strong on the technology side. We were very strong on the content and sales side. And suddenly, well, if you put these two, medium-sized companies together and suddenly you're strong in technology and sales and content creation, well, that can be something super powerful. And so I think the deal, from start of the first conversation in October and it closed in February. So it moved at a relatively fast pace.
Pretty quick.
Yeah.
So were you selling that combination, Jacqui, or did the acquirer recognize it? Was it just mutual, or were you the marketer in that phase?
I think it was mutual. Yeah, I think it was mutual. I mean, like if you're looking for an acquisition, I think you have to do as much research as you can about the partner you're talking to and try and think of how or why your company is a fit. But it happened that this was an opportunity for them to fast track their growth, their scale, and their revenue, and get a deeper holding in the U.S. market. So I think it was a good fit.
Well, congratulations on that end of the journey, or maybe it's not the end for you. Maybe you're going to do more journeys. But I know this is an impossible question, but are there any kind of looking back, summing up kind of points that you would make? I'll give you an example. For startup entrepreneurs, would you be in the just do it camp if you've got an idea, or would you be in the, gosh, you got to do a lot more strategic planning and thinking?
I'm definitely in the just do it camp. I think even since Red Tricycle started, 10, 12 years ago, there's so many more tools and resources available that the cost for testing an idea to start an idea are so small now. I would say just jump in and try it and get started. And also there are so many great resources out there like Angel List and lots of networks where you can talk to other entrepreneurs, that if you have an idea and a passion and the drive, I just don't see that. It feels to me like there's no reason why you can't get it off the ground.
Any more advice that you would give to our entrepreneurs?
What can I say? Have fun along the way. Enjoy it. Start a business that you like spending your time doing, because you're going to be spending a lot of time, hours and hours every single day.
Yeah. Well, also, people talk about the stress and the hours that they put in. To complete your story, you're still married to that same wonderful husband. Your baby is now a teenager. You're still gorgeous and
Yes.
fit. And so that you didn't sacrifice those things to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think parenting overall is evolving, and there's most households now are two working parents, not a lot of stay at home, and so you just kind of figure out it's like a work life integration rather than a balance, and you figure it out.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, Jacqui, thank you so much for this tour of your entrepreneurial journey. It's a real inspiration for anyone, I think, and you're exemplary. I used to say heroine, but I'm not allowed to say that anymore. So the champion of the entrepreneurial.
Thank you. Well, this is exciting. I loved having an opportunity to talk through all this stuff, because now I'm getting like pumped to start on my next startup. So this is a good little launching pad for me to start diving in again. So thanks so much, and I look forward to hearing it.
Good. Thank you, Jacqui. This has been wonderful.
Okay. Thanks.
Economics for Business is a production of the Mises Institute. To explore more content like this, visit Mises.org. And for more from Hunter Hastings, visit hunterhastings.com.